Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the third International Workshop of Structuralist Development Macroeconomics Research Group. It is both a pleasure and an honor to finally have an in-person event here at the Faculty of Economics, Business Administration, Accounting and Public Management of the University of Brasilia. This third workshop, sponsored by the Scientific and Technological Park of the University of Brasilia, PCTEC-UNB, the Institute of Applied Economic Research, IPEA, the Federal Council of Economics, COFECOM, the Regional Council of Economics of the Federal District, CORECON-DF, the Regional Council of Goiás, CORECON-Goiás, and the National Council for Scientific and Technological Development, CNPq. We are very grateful for the support given by FACE-UNB, which has made this green auditorium available for the realization of this three-day workshop in Brasilia. And let me take a moment to introduce myself. I am Zadora Quaresma, an enthusiastic economics student from this department. It is a privilege to be amongst such distinguished individuals and experts in this field. Thank you for the opportunity, especially Professor Oreiro, to be part of this remarkable event. Before the welcome speech of the organizer of this conference, Professor Oreiro, from the University of Brasilia, I ask you to watch a small video about the city, which is the pride of the Brazilian people, our federal capital city, Brasilia.
Slowly comes the wind so fast, overtakes the valley, clinging to the earth until the spring breaks free. Under the ever-watchful eye of the Maker, the life asleep inside the ground awakens. Oh
Brasilia is a very unique city, built from scratch over 60 years ago. Now I'd like to invite Professor José Luis Oreiro to deliver his welcome speech to all our guests.
Good morning. Dear Professor José Márcio Carvalho, Director of the Faculty of Economics, Administration, Accounting, and Public Policy. Dear Professor Cláudia Mitramo, Director of Macroeconomic Studies of the Institute of Applied Research. Dear friend Júlio Miraguaia, representing the President of the Federal Council of Economics, economist Paulo Dantas. Dear Professor Cássia Kamenak, President of the Regional Council of Economics of the State of Goiás, that is with us online. Dear guests and researchers from Brazil, Latin America, the United States, Western European countries, and also from India. As a leader of the Structuralist Development Macroeconomics Research Group, I want to give to all of you the welcome to the third international workshop of the research group, whose central theme this year is New Developmentalism, Public Policies for Innovation, Social Inclusion, and Sustainable Development. Climate change is a scientifically proven fact, but not yet treated with due urgency by the governments of developed countries, and especially by the governments of developing countries. I believe that the fundamental reason for developing countries to have little interest in the issue of climate change is because a false dilemma has been established between environmental preservation and economic development. In this way, developing countries as Brazil understand that they cannot be called upon to sacrifice the increased quality of life of their citizens because of the environmental mistakes made in the past by developed countries. The fundamental premise of this workshop is that there is no such dilemma between economic development and the fight against climate change. On the contrary, developing countries can and should enter the new industrial revolution provided by the need to decarbonize the economy, which will require significant investment in the transition to a low carbon economy. These investments will be intensive in knowledge and the use of labor, and can therefore be compatible with the goals of reducing CO2 emissions, with the generation of income and employment, as well as reducing income inequality. This is a great opportunity for Brazilian economy. After 4 decades of semi-stagnation, to a process of premature industrialization, Brazil is able to reindustrialize its economy and with this, resume economic development, generating high-quality jobs and greater equity in income distribution through the necessary investments for what my colleague and friend, Professor Giulio Guarini, and I called ecological structural change. For this, cooperation between the state and private initiative will be absolutely necessary. Liberalism and Soviet socialism are outdated ideas. What we need is a social market economy in which the state and the private sector go hand in hand together to achieve a better future for Brazil and for all humanity. The resumption of economic development in an ecological, sustainable way is the best way for which Brazil can reach its destiny to be an important player in the new global order. Many thanks.
In order to formally open the workshop, I would like to invite Professor José Márcio Carvalho, the Director of the Faculty of Economics, Business Administration, Accounting, and Public Management of the University of Brasília, to join us at the head table. Now, I invite to compose the table the Director of Macroeconomic Studies of the Institute of Applied Economic Research, Dr. Cláudia Mitramo. Now, I invite to compose the table the Counselor of the Federal Council of Economics, economist Julio Miragaia. I invite to compose the table the President of the Regional Council of Economics, the Federal District, economist José Luis Ponhasati, represented by Professor José Luis Oreiro. The President of the Regional Council of Economics of Goiás, economist Kessia Pedra Kamenash, will join us by video conference.
Yes, she's on. You can.
Now, ladies and gentlemen, I invite you to hear in your feet and with respect the execution of the national anthem of Brazil. We declare open the third international workshop of the Structuralist Development Macroeconomics Research Group. I now ask for all the members of the table to return to their seats, except Dr. Claudia Mitrano, who will be the chair of our first keynote lecture. What? Oh, okay. I invite now Professor José Márcio Carvalho to make his welcome speech.
Thank you very much, Dr. José Oreiro, for organizing this important seminar. Welcome, everybody, to the University of Brasilia. The University of Brasilia is a young, if you compare to universities in Europe or US, just 63 years old, but is big. We are a community of about 50,000 people and a growing university. And we hope to add, in terms of services, to the Society of Federal District, but also to Brazil. The university is present in most of fields of knowledge, both with undergraduate programs and graduate programs. And this faculty is one important engine in the university. It's leading the university as an original founder of the university. And we have very demanded undergraduate programs and PhD, master degree and PhD programs. Especially the Department of Economics is original unity that helped to create the University of Brasilia and always led this university with the institution of research. It was the first department to create a master degree program. It was the first department to create a PhD program. It was the first department to create a professional master degree program. And the intellectual leadership, very important, both for the faculty and the university. Dr. José Loureiro is creating new forum of discussions. It's building a network very important for our faculty, for our students, for our lecturers. And we're very proud to have him leading in this development of seminars and program. He's very energetic, as you know, and is creating new forums of discussions that has a more broad and ambitious objectives. So thank you very much. We are very happy to receive you at the University of Brasilia at FACE, Faculdade de Economia, Administração, Contabilidade e Gestão de Políticas Públicas, and at our Industrials Department of Economics. Thank you very much for coming.
Now I invite Dr. Claudia Mitrano to make his welcome speech.
Hello, everyone. Can you hear me? Well, good morning, everyone. I'm very glad to be here today. And let me say that today is a very happy and important day. We are initiating the third international workshop of the Structuralist Development Macroeconomic Research Group, SDMRG, which realization became possible through the partnership of many institutions, which IPEA couldn't be more honored and gladder to be part of. I would like to compliment Professor Luiz Oreiro, in name of whom I compliment all the members of this table. In the beginning of the year, when I was appointed to this role as Director of Macroeconomic Studies and Policies at IPEA, the Administrative Director of the Institute called upon all the directors to foster and financially support events that could enlighten the Brazilian Economic Academy and the public debate about economic and public policies. So when I heard that SDMRG was starting the preparation of this seminar, I thought, well, this is the opportunity to accomplish that goal. But why SDMRG? Well, because it is one of the most vibrating and inspiring economics academic groups in Brazil nowadays, which is bringing to us all cutting-edge ideas and proposals to reflect about the Brazilian and the world economic situation and a better future. It is a unique research group in Brazil, and I have no doubts that is now recognized as one of the leading macroeconomics and development groups in our country. So IPEA is very pleased and honored to be part of it. Now, let me change the topic and introduce our distinguished guest, Professor Oslin Onaran. Professor Onaran is Professor of Economics at the University of Greenwich in the UK. She's the director of Greenwich Political Economy Research Center and co-director of the Institute of Political Economy, Governance, Finance, and Accountability. She has done extensive research on issues of inequality, wage-led growth, employment, globalization, gender, and crisis. She has directed research projects for rebuilding macroeconomics, ESRC, the International Labour Organization, UNCTAD, ITUC, the Institute for New Economic Thinking, the Foundation of European Progressive Studies, the Vienna Chamber of Labor, the Austrian Science Foundation, and Union 21. She's member of Scientific Committee of the Foundation of European Progressive Studies, Scientific Advisory Board of Hans Boker Foundation, and the Policy Advisory Group of the Women Budget Group. She has more than 100 articles in books and peer-reviewed journals such as Cambridge Journal of Economics, World Development, Feminist Economics, Environment and Planning, Public Choice, Economic Inquirer, European Journal of Industrial Relations, International Review of Applied Economics, Structural Change in Economic Dynamics, Eastern European Economics, and Review of Political Economy. She has received many awards and recognitions, and recently she was invited by Nobel laureate Professor Joseph Stiglitz to the Task Force on Employment and presented their joint work research with Dr. Sen Oyat at the meeting on employment prospects in developing countries. Just to mention some of her recent publications, she wrote, Can wealth taxation fund public investment in a caring and sustainable economy? The case of UK in the Cambridge Journal of Economics, in partnership with some co-authors. She also wrote the effect of global value chain participation on the labor share, also with co-author, in development chain, and finally, the effect of labor bargaining to wealth inequality in the UK, the US, and France, in the review of income and wealth. But just to finish, I promise that I will not be so long. Just to finish, let me do a personal statement. If I had to select just a few words to describe Professor Onaran, I would say that she is one of the leading heterodox and post-Keynesian economists of my generation, whose excellent work has enlightened us in the frontiers of the profession. Her work on income distribution, wage-led growth, as well as her empirical investigations on these subjects has been a cornerstone of this debate. She is also a very generous and kind person. We first met in Geneva in 2012 in a meeting at ILO, where Professor Marc Lavoie and Engelbert Stockhammer were finalizing what became later the book, Wage-Led Growth, an Equitable Strategy for Economic Recovery, in which Professor Onaran contributed with a chapter entitled, Is Aggregate Demand Wage-Led or Profit-Led? A Global Model, which was co-authored by Georgios Galanis, and which became a reference in the empirical literature on demand regimes. At the time, I can say, and I'm really grateful, she received me so well and gave me all the attention, despite my poor English and being an unknown Brazilian economist. In the middle of many stars of the procession, like Marc Lavoie, Lance Taylor, and many others. After that, I had the opportunity to meet her again many times, but one that was remarkable for me was when I was in London as visiting researcher at SOAS in 2006 and 2017. There I had the opportunity to attend many interesting conferences and seminars promoted or gave by Professor Onaran in the Greenwich Political Economy Research Center at the University of Greenwich. Finally, I would like to say that having Professor Onaran here for the opening of this seminar is of paramount importance, because we have a female economist from a developing country, Turkey, at the center of our profession. It is something really important for us. And I hope her presence here inspire many young women and men to follow her steps. So after this brief introduction and without further ado, it's after that? Yeah. Ah, okay. Oh, sorry. I thought it's already done. My fault. Sorry for that. Thank you very much.
Yes, I now invite economist Júlio Miragaia to make his welcome speech.
Bom dia a todos. Eu vou falar aqui rapidamente, representando o Conselho Federal de Economia, vou falar em português e também desculpar porque eu fui avisado ontem à noite, né? Paulo Dantas não pôde vir, estou representando aqui o presidente, então a gente improvisou rapidamente aqui um pronunciamento. Inicialmente saudar os organizadores aqui desse evento, né? A UNB, o CNPq, o IPEA, todos que estão aqui presentes. E eu vou rapidamente focar num dos aspectos, né, que está colocado aqui nesse seminário, que é da inclusão social, né? Questão de sustentabilidade ambiental e inovação é também importante, mas eu queria focar até pela brevidade do tempo. O Brasil ele se caracteriza como um dos países que tem a maior concentração de renda no mundo. E a gente sabe que esse quadro no mundo inteiro, mas no Brasil ele tem se agravado, né? Tem estudos recentes, a Fundação Getúlio Vargas Social publicou recentemente o mapa da riqueza, né? Que mostra que a concentração de renda aumentou durante a pandemia. A gente, por exemplo, vê as divulgações da Forbes mostrando que a cada ano os milionários e bilionários estão cada vez mais milionários e bilionários, enquanto bilhões de pessoas, né, passam por privações extremas. E eu tenho, lá no Conselho Federal de Economia, nós temos claro que não vamos ter inclusão social se não retomarmos o crescimento econômico e, principalmente, reduzirmos a concentração da renda e da riqueza no Brasil. Em 2016, quando eu estive na presidência do COFECOM, nós lançamos uma campanha pela redução da desigualdade social no Brasil, que reúne cerca de 30 entidades nacionais. Mas é uma dificuldade muito grande, né, fazer essa discussão, porque do outro lado tem forças poderosíssimas, né, que acabam travando qualquer avanço nessa área. A gente tem obstáculos em relação ao crescimento econômico, poderia citar aí o Banco Central, que tem colocado um empecilho enorme para que o país retorne o crescimento. E em relação à questão da concentração da renda e da riqueza, os obstáculos são óbvios, né? O capital financeiro, o capital industrial, o capital agrário, que faz com que isso também tenha um impacto muito grande, né, na possibilidade do país retomar o crescimento econômico. Esse segundo semestre agora, vamos ter a discussão passada, a discussão do arcabouço fiscal, polêmico, controverso, né, mas não cabe aqui discuti-lo. Vamos ter a discussão da reforma tributária. E nos preocupa muito, porque ela foi dividida em duas partes. Primeira fase, que vai tratar principalmente da simplificação, que é necessária. Nós temos uma estrutura tributária altamente complexa e nociva ao próprio ambiente de negócio. E a segunda fase seria dedicada à tributação da renda e da riqueza. E aí que mora o perigo, porque provavelmente, e a gente percebe isso, eu estou hoje lá no Senado Federal, e a gente percebe que não há uma disposição para que se enfrente essa discussão da renda e da riqueza, tributação da renda e da riqueza, né? Alguns pronunciamentos lá falam claramente de que, vencida essa primeira fase da simplificação, onde tem conflitos aí interfederativos e tal, resolvido isso, pouco vai se avançar em relação à questão da tributação da renda e da riqueza. O sistema tributário no Brasil, todos sabem, é altamente regressivo, né? Ou seja, tributa principalmente o consumo, né, e a produção. Isso faz com que quem pague, né, mais impostos no Brasil proporcionalmente seja a classe trabalhadora e a classe média, isentando os mais ricos. Daí o imposto de grande fortuna que nunca é emplacado, a isenção para lucros e dividendos, e de outro lado ele também distribui mais para quem está no topo da pirâmide do que quem está embaixo. Esse estudo aqui da Unafisco Sindical, eles chamam de privilegiômetro tributário, ele desmascara, né, toda essa situação. São nada menos que 490 bilhões de reais de renúncia fiscal, das quais 200 bilhões tem alguma justificativa econômica e social, mas 290 bilhões, né, é dinheiro, né, transferido do orçamento público para esses segmentos que estão no topo da pirâmide. Então, essa estrutura, que no entender lá do Conselho Federal de Economia, né, tem sido o principal mecanismo de promoção da concentração da renda e da riqueza no nosso país. Como é que a gente muda isso, né? Essa é uma discussão que está colocada. Finalizando, né, eu sou muito pessimista que o Congresso Nacional, esse Congresso que está aqui, possa tomar uma iniciativa progressiva no sentido de inverter, né, esse quadro que está no nosso sistema tributário. Somente uma ampla mobilização social seria capaz de pressionar o Congresso e fazer com que alguma coisa se avance. Então, a gente vai continuar sempre batalhando, vai continuar sempre levantando essas bandeiras, mas num quadro de muita dificuldade, né, para que a gente possa efetivamente avançar tanto, né, em estabelecer uma rota para o nosso crescimento econômico, a retomada do crescimento, quanto também para que a gente possa, via sistema tributário mais progressivo, reduzir essa absurda concentração da renda e da riqueza no nosso país. Muito obrigado.
In name of the economist José Luiz Paiunsati, I invite Professor Oreiro to make his welcome speech.
Well, many thanks. I'm representing the president of the Regional Council of Economics of Federal District. I will be very brief, just 200 pages of speech. No, I'm joking, okay? Well, just two thoughts. The first one is my favorite sport, is to criticize the Brazilian Central Bank. As many of you already know, that I'm the enemy number one of the president of the Brazilian Central Bank, Roberto Campos Neto. But in order for Brazil to resume economic development, one first necessary step is that we have a reasonable macroeconomic policy, and this means that we must have a reasonable short-term interest rate. In the last 12 months, the short-term interest rate in Brazil stays at the constant level of 13.75% per year, despite the accumulated inflation in 12 months is declining. The last number of the inflation rate in Brazil for the 12 past months was less than 4%. This means that our real short-term interest rate is high as 9% per year. This is an absurd number, is much higher than numbers, the real numbers in European Union, in the United States, or in other developing economies. These unjustifiable interest rate will make a huge income transfer this year of more or less 700 billion reais, which means more or less 150 billion euros from the entire society to the top 1% of Brazilian people. This is the massive income distribution program from all the society to the top rich. If we are not able to change this monetary policy, and we are not able until now because in 2021, a law was passed in the Congress that approved the formal independence of the central bank. So President Lula, when he assumed his third term, is probably the first head of state since the times of Queen Mary I of Portugal that is not allowed to choose the president of the Monetary Authority of Brazil. Is the first time in history of Brazil since the end of the 18th century that the head of the state, which means not only under the Republican era that started on 15th of November 1889, but also when we become a united kingdom with Portugal in 1808, when the Portuguese royal family arrived in Brazil, escaping from the invasion of Napoleon of Iberica Peninsula. When the royal family arrived in Brazil, one of the first acts of the regent prince, John VI, was to found the Bank of Brazil, and he appointed the first president of the Bank of Brazil, which was at that time the monetary authority of the Brazilian economy. Since then, all the head of states, Your Majesty the Emperor Peter I, Your Majesty the Emperor Peter II, and all Republican presidents up to Bolsonaro had the power to choose the president of the monetary authority. But now we have an exception. And that's why, in my view, we still have this absurd interest rates that has no economic justification and is hurting the Brazilian economy and is making a huge income distribution from the entire society to the 1% top richest citizens in this country. Well, that's my first idea. The second is, a little marketing. I'm in this conference, I'm selling my two books in Portuguese. The one, Macrodinâmica Pós-Keynesiana, it's a textbook of growth and distribution. And the other, Macroeconomia do Desenvolvimento, that is a textbook on development macroeconomics. If any one of you wants to buy the book, this guy there, Daniel Moura, Daniel, raise your hand. The books are with him. You can pay with Pix, and my signature for a while is for free. Thank you very much.
Now I invite economist Kessia Pedra Kamenash to make her welcome speech.
Sem áudio.
Sem áudio, Kessia.
Sem áudio. Sem áudio. Ela tá pensando para falar.
You are muted.
Oh, she had a problem there. Okay. Ah, audio is mute. No, leave computer. Ah. Daniel. Kessia, Kessia, se você está me ouvindo, o seu áudio está desligado. Agora sim, Kessia.
Sim, ok. Bom, bom dia a todos e a todas. Eu peço um pouco de desculpa por conta do barulho. Aqui estão mexendo com obra, então tá meio barulhinho. Bom, de antemão, pedir desculpa por não estar aí com vocês presencial, mas eu tive um problema familiar e não pude me ausentar de Goiânia esses dias. Mas nesse evento, que é extremamente importante, né, para o grupo de pesquisa e para nós que estamos apoiando, que traz aí temas, né, para serem discutidos, sobretudo a questão da importância da sustentabilidade nesse período que a gente vem pós-pandemia. Então, primeiramente, quero parabenizar o professor Oreiro pela dedicação à docência, à pesquisa, essa preocupação em estar promovendo esses debates, não só em relação ao meio acadêmico, mas também para a sociedade, tomar um pouco mais de consciência sobre a área das ciências econômicas, né? Que impacta diretamente a rotina do cidadão, que impacta a rotina das empresas, que impacta também as decisões do setor do governo, né, do setor público. Então, o tema deste ano, eu não vou me alongar na discussão em relação ao tema, porque acredito que já apresentaram muito bem alguns pontos dos temas, e ele vai ser discorrido aí ao longo desses 3 dias, mas falar que neste ano, no sistema, né, sistema quando eu cito, é o sistema Conselho de Economia em nível federal e em nível regional, esse tema ele vai estar presente, esse tema da sustentabilidade, ele vai estar presente dentro dos debates dos encontros regionais que temos de economistas e também do Congresso Brasileiro de Economia, que esse ano vai acontecer no estado do Maranhão. Então, isso demonstra a importância deste debate, né, para as ciências econômicas, e a gente tem, então, este workshop, vamos dizer assim, abrindo, né, essa temática nessa discussão em termos do meio, né, dos economistas. Então, professor Oreiro, parabéns pela escolha do tema, parabéns por você dar início, né, neste ano, vamos dizer assim, a essa discussão que nós temos aqui no Brasil hoje, em termos de sistema. Então, quero cumprimentar os pesquisadores que vieram, né, de outros países para estar aí conosco. Então, sejam bem-vindos aqui ao Brasil e desejo a todas e todos um excelente workshop.
Now, after these speeches, We declare open the third international workshop of the Structuralist Development Macroeconomics Research Group. Now I ask for all the members of the table to return to their seats, except Dr. Claudia Mitrano, who will be the chair of our first keynote lecture.
Okay, well, I'm not going to repeat all my previous speech, okay? Please don't, please don't, please don't. I'm not going to do this.
It is our
okay.
honor to invite Professor Özlem Onaran from the University of Greenwich in the United Kingdom to compose the table.
So as I told you, I'm not going to repeat my previous speech, just to say that, and sorry for my mistake, for hindering the rules of the table. And just to say that the Institute for Applied Economic Research is a research institute of the government. And it is fully committed to sustainable development, social inclusion in a broad sense, and with democracy, which is really important nowadays to remind us all about democracy. And just to summarize what I said, we have here one of the most talented, proliferous and economists of my generation, and a very generous, kind person that I have met. And it's really important to have someone like Professor Onaran here today to initiate this seminar. And while we wait to the presentation, just congratulate Professor Herrero as well, and all the members of the SDMRG for the conference, which I think that will be one of the most important groups in Brazil about macroeconomics and development. Okay, and now the most speech, and without further ado, Professor Özlem Onaran, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you, Claudio. I have to say, it is a great pleasure for me to be here in Brasilia. This is my second time in Brazil. The first time was 2003, Porto Alegre World Social Forum. And I will have my personal reflections on that and being here again, but I should start by thanking the organizers, Professor Jose Oreiro, Dr. Claudio Mitrano personally and institutionally, the Structuralist Development Macroeconomics Research Group, IPEA, was University of Brasilia, and federal and regional councils of economics. I should say, I find it as my duty to be with economists trying to make a positive impact on the environment, on people's lives, reverting inequalities, and in this very difficult dystopian times we are living. So, and it is actually a privilege to be with economists coming from both robust, but also economics of the future, as opposed to neoliberal economics of the dystopian past, who also have both independence, but also influence on economic policy making on a key country like Brazil, a leading G20 economy, a leading emerging economy. I find it my duty or meaning of my existence to give ammunition to economists like Professor Orere, Dr. Claudia Mitrano, and all the other colleagues that are in the room or online with us, to give ammunition such that we can finally make a positive impact. I should also, at my own now personal note, it's true that the first time I met Claudia was at an ILO conference in 2012 in Geneva. We were struggling with data about emerging economies, about Brazil, about Mexico, Argentina, about the white share, where year after year military coups made data availability very difficult for researchers who want to ask unpleasant questions about inequality. And I am grateful for Claudio having helped us at that moment for the project we were doing for the ILO. And later we did catch up over conferences during the year he spent in London as well, and at other conferences afterwards. And when the invitation came to come here, when he told me that he's now the director of Macroeconomics Institute, IPA, I was so honored. And I should say yesterday, when I was thinking about being back to Brazil 20 years later, after the World Social Forum, thinking, oh, it was 20 years ago, I thought of a Turkish song. I'm not going to sing it. I have very bad musicality and really very bad voice when I'm singing, at least. But the song goes on like that. It's the opposite of really aging. The years haven't been wasted. After lots of storms, lots of waves, we are together again. Our dreams aren't wasted, neither our future is wasted. There is hope. And I'm going to finish by something that I should say. I was also very honored to hear and read the lyrics of the Brazilian national anthem. I think it is one of the most, if not the most, progressive national anthems I have heard of, including my home country of birth and my adopted country and the country I live in. It's talking about equality and peace and about the natural and human resources of the country. What a great start for us to build on as progressive economists. Okay, so thank you so much for having me. As I said, I will base my talk on the work that we have been doing with my colleague, Cem Oyvat, talking about the employment effects of public spending in the green and caring economy. Their work looks at particularly emerging economies. This was work that we have done for the International Trade Union Confederation. Having seen that, I think we have uploaded a different version. No, that's the good version. Okay, because I had sent a version to the organizers, and while uploading this now again, I was worried that I might have uploaded an older version, but this is the version. Okay, so we are living in the thick of multiple crises. It makes me think like I'm a actress in a side role in a dystopian science fiction movie. Not when I think about it, but the bad thing about it is it's not a dystopian science fiction movie. It's happening today, here and everywhere. So we are facing climate change, ecological breakdown. We are facing also very deep care needs in an aging society. And this is important, not just for advanced capitalist economies, but also for emerging economies from Asia to Latin America. We are facing very deep inequalities in terms of class, race, and gender. And we are facing a new phase of technological change, which actually is posing a risk to the type of development we used to rely on in emerging economies, in the developing world, relying on manufacturing as the motor of job creation. Artificial intelligence is creating challenges and opportunities, but what we have to face now is this time it is different. So whatever we will form as policy proposals has to take all of these on board. And in that big picture, one of the questions that is most important to me is, what is the employment creation potential of public spending in the green and the care economy, and investing also in other infrastructure? Can that be one of the key policies for a green and caring just transition to a zero carbon economy with full employment and decent jobs? Can this be the key to also redeployment away from fossil fuel based sectors? I know these are difficult questions, but as researchers, it's our duty to ask these questions and pose them to governments. So what I will do now is to go over the key aspects of a macroeconomic model that we propose to answer these key questions. It builds on in the structuralist tradition on post-Keynesian Kaleckian models. We extend them by integrating gender. So it's a gendered model. Again, one of my key aspirations here is to make sure that we avoid competition between needs, need of tackling climate change, but need of tackling also the care deficit in the economy. So to be able to do that, we need a broad structuralist or a new structuralist model. I will talk about then the methodology to put that into empirical terrain. As Claudio has generously said, one of the important things for me is to go beyond just theory, but also to bring these theoretical questions into empirical terrain to test them. So I'm going to briefly present to you what econometric results we have, and then the policy simulations we do using those econometric estimations. And then I'm going to conclude by policy implications. As I said, we are working with a post-Keynesian gendered model. And the gist of it is that in the traditional post-Keynesian economics, it's a demand-led growth model. We are extending some work that has been done before us by Brownstein and colleagues, by Seguino, and a lot of what I will be presenting today in terms of the theoretical model has been developed in some of the articles Claudio very generously has referred to, and a very recent version of that was the project that we have done for the International Trade Union Confederation. What is important from a structuralist development perspective is that demand side constraints are important. That means we are operating in economies with excess capacity. That means we have unemployment of an involuntary nature, which gives a very potent role to public spending, public investment, to be precise. Fiscal policy does have very strong effects on the demand side of the economy. It does have very strong distributional effects as well. And employment is affected by demand, and therefore it has very strong impact on job creation. We post-Keynesians or structuralist macroeconomists are often boxed into, well, demand side economists only. It isn't true. A lot of us, and currently myself and my colleagues, do have a supply side analysis in our macro models. The long and the short of it, the demand side does have effects on the supply side as well. It does affect productivity. It does affect technological change. It also has effects on labor supply, particularly when you're thinking of the provision of care infrastructure. or for that matter, the lack of it, it has a very strong effect on women's labor supply. In these models, the distribution is not just a cost, it is a very active role. Wages are both costs, but also a very important source of demand. They have a dual effect. It's, if you like, the Kaleckian strand within post-Keynesian macro. And more recently, we have started to look at distribution from a multiple perspective. It isn't just about income distribution. It's also about wealth distribution, wealth concentration at the top 1%. And it's also about gender gaps in employment and wages. All these distributional matters have both demand and supply side effects on productivity. These analyses are structuralist in the good Latin American sense of the word, in the sense that the sectoral composition of your economy matters, import dependency of your economy matters, gendered social norms and thereby gendered occupational segregation has effects on, for example, impact of different types of fiscal policies. We are working with a real world case where firms have oligopoly power, price setting power, and there are differences in bargaining power between capital and labor, and between and different bargaining powers of men versus women as well. All these have macroeconomic consequences. And last but not least, public infrastructure in terms of both the physical and social infrastructure has a very important effect on both the demand and supply side consequences. So within this model, and given the question of urgency of tackling these multiple crises, on the demand side, I'm going to start by first talking about the public sector, and then I'll briefly talk about what the other demand side variables like consumption or private investments are doing. So on the government side, on the demand side, in this model or in this piece of work, we are looking at the impact of public spending in the care economy, to be precise, on social infrastructure, which is the public spending in education and childcare and health and social care. I will be referring to that as also investment in human capabilities. So it will show up in abbreviations that you will see later as YH, that's the value added created by the government through care economy spending in the human capabilities producing sector. The second important public spending we are focusing on is public investment as well as current spending in the green economy. Here we are looking at the potential effects of public investment in renewable energy with a focus on solar, wind, hydro, and geothermal energy. It can be extended depending on the needs and the natural strengths of a country. These are the four that we think to be relevant for a lot of the economies we're looking at. The second green public investment factor is investment and current spending to increase energy efficiency. That goes from construction to insulate the existing building stocks, to increasing energy efficiency in the industry, to upgrading the national grid and increasing its energy efficiency. The third factor we are looking at is public transport. That is both investment and current spending to provide public transport services, excluding air transport, and with a focus on, in particular, rail network, both investing and providing public transport services. Mind you, we are not modeling stimulus or subsidizing private electric vehicle production. It is taught as part of the green economy in some other simulations that you would be looking at. But the idea here is, how do we decrease the material use as well as increase energy efficiency and reduce emissions all in one intervention by the government? I will be referring to that in short as RECT in the future slides, in abbreviation, that is renewable energy, energy efficiency, and public transport. The third is then public investment in other physical infrastructure. I emphasize physical infrastructure because we refer to the care economy spending as social infrastructure spending. Maybe one heads up there, the social infrastructure in our national accounts is labeled as current spending when you pay the wages of the social care worker, the teacher, the nurse, or the nursery teacher. Feminist economists say that's an investment in social infrastructure. Obviously, there is other infrastructure that also requires government investment. That would be items like social housing or the physical infrastructure for the care economy, such as hospitals, schools, or nursing homes. So in terms of the full interactions in the model, if I can briefly give you a taste of what happens when we stimulate public spending, what happens on the demand side, what happens on the supply side. And as I go along, I'm going to say a few words about the other demand components in the model as well. So be it the public spending in the care economy, social infrastructure, or public spending in the green economy or other infrastructure, all these in the short run will have very strong positive direct effects on aggregate demand and thereby aggregate output, hence GDP in the short run. That is the short run effects. Behind these positive arrows, and these are not assumptions, but empirically well-validated effects that we find. And I'm going to talk about how big those effects are, how big are the multipliers in the short run and the medium run later. But behind these effects are obviously the effects on the other components of aggregate demand. It's consumption, private investment, and net exports. On the consumption front, consumption is a function of wages of men and women and profits after tax. It's also a function of wealth. We look at wealth as the wealth of the top 1%, if you like, the capitalist class, and the wealth of the bottom 99%, the rest of the society, predominantly wage earning labor and small and medium enterprises. So consumption will increase when you hire more public employees or outsource these services or increase people's wages, obviously. Mind you, there will be different effects if the money goes more to the women workers versus men workers. They have differences in their marginal propensities to consume. There are also differences in the marginal propensities to consume out of wages versus profits. Public spending also is a stimulus to private investment. Two reasons. One is it creates demand, and private investment actually responds to demand very strongly. It does provide infrastructure that improves business environment. We do allow a general model here in the good Keynesian tradition of general theory. Thus, we do allow potentially an increase in the interest rate if you increase public spending. And if that does happen, we do allow for a negative potential effect on private investment, which will depend on the interest elasticity of private investment. Meaning nothing is ruled out in the model theoretically, if you like. Of course, whether that crowding out effect materializes or not is an empirical question. Just maybe spoilers for the end. In my experience, that effect is either insignificant or very minor. Hence, if you spend as the government, you will stimulate private investment and big time. The third component, obviously, net exports in the short term wouldn't benefit from that, wouldn't be affected from that. There would be the long run effects coming from productivity later from the supply side effects. There will be some import leakage that will depend on your country's import dependency, surely, when you increase public spending. And it is a matter of concern for emerging economies. But please wait for me to complete the medium-term productivity effects until we can talk about the potential import dependency matters when the government increases spending. So the long and the short of it, you get in the short run a positive stimulus to aggregate output from public spending. You will get obviously a positive effect on employment of both women and men. There will be more stronger employment effects on women's employment if public spending is in the care economy. there will be stronger effects on men's employment in absolute numbers if public spending is in the green economy or in physical infrastructure. But both, of course, are creating demand, and both through the aggregate output effects are creating jobs for both men and women. The composition of that depends on gender occupational segregation. And the model itself, women's changes in women's and men's employment does improve the bargaining power of workers. Wages are endogenously set through a bargaining relationship. Women's wages and men's wages respond to changes in each other's wages as well. And overall, of course, all these wage changes will then have effects on prices as well. Maybe if we were giving this talk 3 years ago, we wouldn't even worry that much about price effects. Now we talk a lot more about, of course, inflation after the surge in inflation. We should be mindful about that. And of course, a rise in prices in the short run will have some negative effect on output also in the short run. In my experience, this effect coming from public stimulus, again, is very small and very manageable, and it requires medium-term thinking and planning. The model is a three-sector model. I have talked about two sectors of it, meaning the care economy and the rest of the economy. It does have an unpaid care block as well. It is important because it is determined exogenously by the demographic needs of the society, but it is also determined by the presence or absence of public provision of care services. So an increase in employment, paid work of women or men will lead to a decline in their unpaid care work. Or it will, if it doesn't lead to a decline in the unpaid care work, it will affect the quality of that work if you're juggling both paid work and unpaid work. And unpaid work, just as the paid work, is very gendered, meaning women are doing the bulk of that unpaid care work. And if that unpaid care need is very high, and if there is no public provision of care social infrastructure, that need will also have a negative effect on women's labor supply. So there is an endogenous labor supply too, that reacts not just to labor demand, not just to wages, but it also reacts to the demands on your time in terms of unpaid care needs in the economy. So obviously, public provision of the care infrastructure itself does decrease the unpaid care requirements for a given demographic structure, which then releases women's potential labor supply if they choose to do so. Okay, so this is about more or less the short run. Now, what happens in the long run? Very magical things happen in the long run. Labor productivity is endogenous, technological change is endogenous, but not only in the way the new mainstream, new Keynesians tell us it is endogenous in the sense that it reacts to what the public sector invests in. So investment by the public sector, or for that matter, investment by the private sector that is in the GDP, as well as demand in aggregate that is also in the GDP effects, all have very strong labor productivity effects. Of course, these are in our post-Keynesian caldo where generation already is in the theory there, but I'm very happy to be able to let you know, and our colleagues who are working in institutions that have an arm's length at least influence on policymaking, know that it's one of the most robust effects that I have observed as an empirical econometrician in my entire, I hate to say, more than 20 years career now. But again, aging never felt so good after being back to Brazil. So it can also be a nice thing to see things are moving forward, not backwards. So 20 years, not lost, not wasted. But yeah, it is there. If you increase wages as well, no wonder that improves labor productivity. So all these means public spending in the medium run, and I'm using the term medium run here rather than maybe the long run, because it's not some neoclassical hypothetical steady state I'm talking about. It's a very empirical thing. Different types of public spending will have productivity effects with a different time lag. Maybe if you invest in transport or communication network or health infrastructure today, it's going to affect productivity almost next year. If you invest in childcare, it may take longer for the children to grow up and be productive, but also in the short run, if it releases me from doing more childcare work at home, I might realize my productive potential at its fullest rather than partially. So yes, even childcare is an investment in productivity. And similarly, elderly care, you could think this doesn't have productivity effect. It's about frail individuals and taking care of them. Yes, but it is investment in your social fabric. And it again releases the productive potential labor force of carers. And these tend to be predominantly, again, women. So it is very important. It is important also when you think about green investment. Climate change does have negative productivity effects. When we talk about inflation, we like talking about supply chain constraints all the time. It is not just that. Inflation is also driven by climate change and related ecological disasters. So overall, investment by the public and increased wages all have positive productivity effects. Now, here comes something, though, to be mindful, like us, for us, is Keynesian economists in the progressive domain. If you increase demand, this will increase employment in the short run. In the long run, you're also increasing productivity, all good news. But then the employment effect on men's and women's employment in the medium run will depend how much output increases and how much productivity increases. Just spoilers, when you stimulate demand by public investment, the medium run output effects are also very strong. Despite also strong miraculous productivity effects, employment would still increase. The important maybe take home here is, if you are relying only on the private sector to do something, by say increasing the minimum wages, it's going to increase women's and men's employment in the short run, because it will have positive demand effects. It will increase demand and employment in the short run. But if you then build in productivity effects in the medium run, wages would increase demand by, say, if you increase wage rate by 1%, demand will increase by, if you are very lucky with multiplier effects, by something like 0.2%. Depending on the country, it might be lower. So most economies, large economies like Brazil, or even some smaller economies that are less import dependent, would be wage-led. Output will increase by increasing wage rate, but that effect is not very big. If you rely on only wage stimulus by the private sector, which is what the progressive South Korean administration did in 2017, surrounded by very conservative civil servants, who are fiscally conservative, trained in neoclassical, New Keynesian tradition in Ivy League universities, mostly in the US, they were not able to increase fiscal spending. So they only relied on policies like minimum wage to create more jobs. Look what happens then in the long run. When productivity increases, it increases by about 0.6% when you stimulate wages by 1%. So productivity effect dominates the demand stimulus. Then you can also have a decline on men's and women's employment. So if a government wants full employment and equality at the same time, you have to put your money where your mouth is. Hence, you have to also rely on public investment. This is now something maybe more for concerns of equality, but also if you're serious about the multiple crises in care, in climate change, in an era of technological change, where AI is creating very different effects in terms of robotization and job creation and productivity, we've got to be even more conscious of the need for public spending here. And hence, this is where I started my whole theoretical discussions. Okay, in terms of now the empirical effects, maybe I'll just tell you that it's not just us, but a range of economists who have looked at the impact of public stimulus in the care economy, the green economy, and infrastructure, find very strong multiplier effects on the GDP and employment. The research that I list here, particularly in the care economy, Karacan et al., Karacan and Kim, who have done the research for the ILO for a range of emerging and advanced economies, including Brazil, is something to rely on. It is coming from the United Nations after all. And there's been previous work done for the ITUC, and we have also done what I'm going to be showing you in a minute about that. We also worked on advanced capitalist economies, the UK. The results are always there. In terms of the green economy and infrastructure, there is research coming from now, IMF researchers, Bottini and colleagues, very strong multiplier effects of green economy investment. They do include nuclear energy as clean investment there. We don't. And again, looking at infrastructure, similar effects are there. People use different modeling techniques here, input-output analysis, as Pauline et al. Are doing. The Fermos and Nicolaidi are using Stock-Low consistent post-Keynesian global macro modeling. Wildauer et al. Or Bottini et al. Are using vector autoregression. The results are always there. We ourselves have worked with single equation, structuralist, econometric estimations, as well as vector autoregression results, which I will show you later. The results are always there. Multiplier effects are strong, larger than one. Employment effects are strong too, despite productivity effects. Okay, maybe my last section, where I will show you some of the empirical findings we have worked for the emerging economies. Recently, that is the work we have done for the ITUC. We looked at 8 emerging economies: Chile, Colombia, India, Indonesia, Philippines, South Korea, South Africa, Turkey. I'm sorry, Brazil was not there. I should say the country selection was made by the ITUC, and they made that decision in December 2021, thinking of where they have lobbying power in the trade union movement. If the decision was made today, I'm sure they would have told us to include Brazil. Back then, these were the countries where they thought they have leverage over government. Hence, I really find my meaning in life as an economist, giving ammunition to people who can use that. Hence, very happy today to be in Brazil. I'm very happy to have worked with ITUC on that. Okay, so what did we do? We have had the green economy stimulus to the renewable energy, energy efficiency, public transport. We said if we stimulate green spending by 1% of GDP in the country every year for 5 years, you could do it for 10 years in the simulations. We had a 5-year horizon, the lifetime of a government. That's how I think about it. We said, let's allocate 1% of that GDP, half of it to renewable energy, equally among wind, solar, geothermal, hydropower. That's coming from work done by Pauline et al. For different emerging and advanced capitalist economies. They said, let's give 20% of that to energy efficiency. Half of that goes to weatherproofing. 25% goes to industrial efficiency. 25% goes to national grid. Then 30% of that spending, 1% of GDP, goes to public transport. And APTA, Association of Public Transport, says 10% of any public transport investment goes to transport infrastructure. We focused on rail transport here, meaning investing in locomotives, rail infrastructure, and so on. 18% would go to construction work to build that infrastructure. And then 72% goes to current spending by the government for providing public transport services. Then we said, the care stimulus is straightforward. That's 1% of GDP. It's in the sector of health and social care, education, and childcare. In terms of how you simulate the effect of 1% GDP spending in renewable energy, energy efficiency, public transport, you need to think about the input-output structure of the economy. And it's really lovely to sit in front of input-output tables and think, what does it take for the government to produce a solar energy or a wind energy farm or invest in geothermal energy? Using numbers from Pauline et al.'s work, about 0.46 percentage point of GDP goes to the sum of manufacturing sub-industries that provide input to those energy efficiency or renewable energy or public transport production. This is basically the sum of sub-industries like plastic, glass, cement, metals, machinery, appliances, locomotives, other transport equipment, and so on. So it is a synthetic sum of these sub-industries. Quite a lot of that goes to construction. No wonder Biden's program has a lot of support from construction trade unions in the US. So if you spend 1% of GDP in green economy, 0.33 percentage point of that goes to construction. And then 0.21% of that goes to public transport services. This is also music to the ears of transport trade unions. So what do we do now? In order not to be very technical, maybe I'm just going to summarize you. In technical language, we are doing a systems estimation using vector autoregression methodology. So we have in the system different public spending categories, aggregate output, that's GDP, and then employment of women and employment of men. Public spending categories are entering alternatingly. In one version, we put the care public spending and then simple gross fixed capital formation accounting for physical infrastructure. And then we have output employment in the system. In another alternative specification, we are looking at particularly just the green economy investment. So we have the value added in the manufacturing subsectors providing input to the renewable energy, energy efficiency, public transport. Then value added in construction and value added in transport services, excluding air transport. And the rest of the system is again aggregate output, employment of women, employment of men. In an ideal world, we could put all of these together. Our data is annual and in the best of all worlds, dates back to 1970s only. So that wouldn't be very advisable. We did try for robustness purposes, but also mind you, there is an overlap between gross fixed capital formation and spending in the green economy. So in order to avoid that overlap as well, having them separately is a good idea. We did experiment putting the green and the care economy together, but then you'll have 4 different spending categories in the system. System grows up very quickly to 7 variables, and it's not, again, very advisable. So overall, our data starts in 1972 in the best of the worlds in South Korea. It ends in 2018 for all of the countries. There are countries in our sample, like South Africa, where data only starts in 1994, post-apartheid. Again, I'm going to South Africa after here with a brief stop at work in London. But I'm really, again, honored that South African progressive economists wants to use these results and impact government's budget negotiations. So, of course, I would run the VAR estimation with data that starts in 1994. What else am I going to do? Particularly if you want to do a gendered analysis, anyway, going back is not an option. But for South Africa, even with aggregate employment, actually, we can't reliably go much before that. So we did try it, and results are surprisingly meaningful. For me, a country with really good data, like Chile in this data set, South Korea, if the results deliver effects that are in line with what you would theoretically expect, then the model is working. And if the model still produces sound results for a country where data is very short, at least I have my reference point for reliability. So I'm happy with that. Okay, so let me maybe summarize what we find in plain English, because of course I was honored to be in the company of also practitioners from the Economics Council. What we find is very simple. As a one-line advice to any government, public investment in the care economy, green economy, and infrastructure broadly has very strong output effects. In the short run, meaning simultaneously within the first year, as well as in the medium run. For us, this is now cumulative at the end of 5 years. So multiplier effects in most countries in all spending categories are larger than 1 in the medium run. There is a very strong productivity effect because employment effect is positive, but less than the output effect expectedly. No surprise. And it's a good thing that public investment stimulates productivity. So this means public investment partly pays for itself. It's partly self-financing. It's not a magic money tree. If you spend 1 rand, 1 real, 1 peso, it's not gonna create tax revenues worth 1 real or 1 peso. Depending on the country, this ranges between 0.2 to 0.5, depending again on the spending category as well. There are differences in the magnitudes of multipliers across spending categories, but across countries too. So import dependency of your country matters, but the way to get out of import dependency in the long run is still via public investment, because that is the way for technological change too. The informality of your economy matters, what affects your finding in terms of multipliers. And of course, how wise you're spending your money, how to spend it. The Financial Times says that we can supplement for the rich. I think we are relying on economists like the economists of IPA to advise the government to wisely spend their money. The composition and the targeted nature matters. Okay, so here are a lot of numbers now. I know we don't have time to digest all of that. So if you look at spending multipliers on GDP for a moment, in the first year simultaneously, and at the end of 5 years in terms of cumulative, these are 8 countries, and the average effect is just the simple average of that. ITUC wanted 1 summary number, fair enough. They're an international organization giving advice, but each country's effect the first 2. Then you have employment effects total and on men and on women. The second table is for the care economy. The third is for gross capital formation in aggregate by the public sector. Okay, I will now talk about only the cumulative effects at the end of 5 years for those 3 spending categories. So the effects in the green economy in terms of GDP multiplier effects at the end of 5 years, cumulative. Mind you, I'm not giving you the annual simultaneous multipliers now in here, though you can see them for each country in the first table. But the 5-year cumulative effects range for the green economy between 1.1 is the multiplier in South Korea to 4.5 in Turkey in cumulative. 4.5 can strike you as high, but again, I'm reminding you that that's the cumulative effect at the end of 5 years of a one-off stimulus in the year 0. The exception here is Philippines, and Philippines remains an exception with lower than 1 multipliers. It's still positive. It's not like negative as the classical economists and their policymakers would tell you. If you look at the care economy, again, the multipliers range this time in Turkey between 1.6, also in South Korea this time, to 4.6 in Korea. In infrastructure, we have multipliers ranging between 1.9 in Colombia to 4.6 in South Korea. If you look at that stimulus as a repeated investment every year, not a one-off, but every year, going into green economy, investing 1% of GDP in renewable energy, energy efficiency, public transport every single year for 5 years. And if you do that for 5 years, at the end of the 5th year, what do we get in terms of GDP? Again, in terms of the average of 8 countries, you get 10% more income in aggregate, more GDP. In terms of employment, you get on average across 8 countries, 7.5% more employment. Of course, there is variation across economies, but on the lower end, even in Philippines, you get about 1.9% more national income. In Turkey, you get about 22% more income. I'm sorry if there is no government in Turkey, we would listen to that advice. So very happy to talk in Brazil. In terms of total employment effects, again, you could get in Colombia about 27% more employment. Even in Philippines with low multipliers, you're getting about 1% more employment. The care economy stimulus in terms of the average GDP effect is about 11%. You get 1.3% more income in Colombia. You get 23% more income in Korea in terms of the range. You get about 6% more employment on average by investing in the care economy. This ranges between 1.5 in Chile to 18% more employment in Korea. The beauty of the care economy effect is that it helps closing gender employment gaps, but it creates jobs for both men and women, although at a faster rate for women. In terms of public physical infrastructure, again, very strong multiplier effects, strongest on average on GDP, you get about 12% more national income. Employment effect on average is also about 12%. There is quite a wide range of differences here. In about 6 countries, employment of both men and women are increasing. There are 2 countries where employment effect on women are insignificant. So we need to be mindful of also gender mainstreaming when we are filling the needs of public infrastructure investment. Okay, just mixing all of them, and this is my one but last slide. If you do all of these, invest in the green and the care economy, do it by increasing both employment and wages of workers. So that's my green, purple caring, and red just transition plan, New Deal, a policy mix of investing, public investment in the care, green economy, and other infrastructure every year for 5 years by 1% of GDP in each of them. And if these numbers strike you as high, I advise you to look at the ILO 2220 report about care investment needs and macroecological models that are telling us how much we should be spending for the next 10 years in the green economy. They're actually not high. They're more like what we need to do. So just in terms of translating the employment growth that you see here in the orange, green, and yellow figures for employment in total and employment of men and women, along with the GDP effects, how many new jobs do we get? Even in Philippines, where we had low multipliers, we are getting 300,000 more jobs, 2 million more jobs in Chile, about 8 million more jobs in Colombia, 27 million more jobs in Indonesia and India. Okay, we have not simulated here disinvestment from the fossil fuel-based brown industries. If you do that, obviously there will be job losses too, but these numbers are telling us that there is a lot of space for redeployment away from fossils if a government puts its mind, well, and money to it. That is very generous. I will need probably only 2 more minutes. Thank you. That's my last slide. Okay, so the punchline of all the empirical work we are doing, the message we are trying to give to policymakers of the countries and the world, and people who have negotiation and policy influence power, like the trade unions, think tanks, or research institutes for that matter. What we need for tackling the multiple crises we are facing is, in terms of leading the way and showing also the private sector the way, is to start with a massive and urgent mobilization of public investment for a green, caring, just transition, targeting both full employment and decent wages. That requires a total paradigm shift to fiscal policy, or for that matter, to economic policy making. We should start by the needs of the economy and the society. We should ask ourselves questions like, how much does the Brazilian government need to spend every year in the green economy, starting from, well, its first 100 days, moving forwards to 5 years, every year, and in a manifesto pledge for the next election in the next 5 years, if we are to really achieve transition to a net zero carbon economy. We have to ask the second question: what are the care needs in an aging society in terms of the investment we need in hiring more care workers, nurses, nursery teachers, doctors, and what is a decent wage they deserve, such that we as a society value the key crucial work they're doing. And while asking this question, we have to also think about what is investment in productivity and infrastructure. Well, certainly green economy is infrastructure, but current spending to hire more nurses or teachers or nursery teachers and pay them higher wages is also investment in infrastructure. It's just social infrastructure. So if we are concerned about the credibility of our spending, we should think about how we redefine what is investment, what is infrastructure, and what is a fiscal credibility rule. Obviously, without tweaking the national accounts and our statistics, but really changing the perception of what is investment versus what is consumption. Having nurses and nursery teachers isn't consumption, but it is investment. Okay, the good news for any government is this is partly self-financing because multipliers are very high. And the route to releasing us from the constraints of balance of payments in the medium run is also going through investing today. But of course, it's not like a magic thing. I am not a subscriber to the modern monetary theory. Multipliers are larger than one, but no public investment in no country, even in the most independent country of imports, will 100% self-finance itself by creating more income and tax revenues. We would have to use all the tools in our toolbox, and that ranges from increasing the tax rates in a progressive fashion on income, changing the tax burden between labor versus capital in a progressive fashion, but also tapping into the untaxed wealth. And in another research paper, we have looked at taxing, particularly the top 1%. It creates magical outcomes. It has a very strong, unexpected, very strong positive effect on private investment, because the top 1% with its wealth is doing just financial speculation. If you tax it, and private investment is actually flourishing, because you are putting a sand in the wheels of financialization, and you're decreasing the oligopoly power. You're actually improving entry to the markets by taxing the top 1%. We have simulated the effects in terms of how much tax revenue that can be collected by, in a progressive fashion, taxing the top 1% in Britain. We can raise almost up to 20% of our current tax revenues. We looked at micro data of household wealth and assets. So it's a very potent tool. It's not being used, and there is a lot of wealth that can be taxed in the emerging economies as well. I wouldn't be able to say the same thing maybe in a low-income economy, but in Brazil, I can say that confidently. Then, of course, we have to use the tools that we had in the past, and it is actually an existing institution in Brazil, national investment banks. And of course, we need to use monetary policy more potently than we are doing now. Monetary policy should be actually the accommodating small sister, or even I dare to say the servant of fiscal policy. It's anyway less effective, but it can be made a lot more effective if we abandon the independence of the central banks, make them dependent on the publicly elected policymakers, in the sense that monetary policy directly can fund part of that green, caring, just transition. Last but not least, of course, we should be able to, and we will have to borrow in the short run. If you're mobilizing in your first year, massive investment of 3% of GDP in the green, care, and infrastructure of your economy, and your mobilization of taxation of wealth may take time, you will have to borrow as long as it is not corrupt, transparent, well monitored. There is a limit to how much we can borrow, not just in emerging economies. I don't know how much you have noticed in September, a conservative prime minister tested the nerves of international financial markets. I dubbed her as Liz Truss. She had only a month in government, and I call her program the right-wing version of modern monetary theory, meaning they cut all the taxes on the rich and really don't cut any spending, and it didn't last very long. We will test the limits of our borrowing. I wouldn't need a fiscal credibility rule for that, but I would be braced if I am a government who is doing this massive mobilization of investment, and the way to pacify such international financial market attack on a government increasing borrowing to invest is to make sure that we tap into progressive taxation as well as monetary policy, as well as national investment banks. And it's not going to be a walk in the park, nevertheless. Okay, so the good news, then moving on, we don't have to be trapped in this science fiction dystopia. There is space in the green and care jobs for redeployment from brown fossil fuel-based sectors. So we don't have to rely on fossil fuels anymore just for the sake of equality or jobs. There are good jobs that can be created, and they are green, and the purple care jobs and the green economy jobs are complementary. Again, something for industrial policy and fiscal credibility rule. Care jobs are jobs with low carbon emissions. They are labor intensive, and it is investment, as in it does stimulate productivity. Again, we crunch numbers for that. We need more than this. We need to talk about hiring and training policies. There will be a lot of mismatches in a transition from fossil fuel to a green renewable energy job, maybe not in the wind, offshore wind, but certainly in some other green jobs. There will be certainly mismatch in terms of redeployment from fossil fuel into the new care jobs. There will have to be changes in social norms as well. All these are actually endogenous, and we need to think about wage policies and training policies with all these in mind. The good news is that's also public investment in the care economy. Okay, so I did say that fiscal policy effects are strong. I'm asked a lot, but is it strong in a small open economy? Well, yes, even when applied in a single country, fiscal policy multipliers are there. They are positive everywhere. They're strong even in 99% of the cases. They get stronger if you combine policies, fiscal policies, with labor market policies, such as improving collective bargaining, labor market formalization, regulation, increasing minimum wages, equal pay, enforcement, parental leave, or shorter working hours, particularly without loss of pay for the below median wage earners. All these stimulate demand and complement fiscal policies in a good way. But of course, fiscal policy effects would be a lot stronger if we did it all together, hence international coordination. Hence, again, very important to be talking about that in Brazil, a G20 economy. I was very happy to hear that the work that our colleagues at IPA does also feeds into the Brazilian positions in G20. If all countries were to do what we are suggesting here, we would avoid the import leakages on emerging economies, small open economies. But coordination has to go beyond that. And we have to also acknowledge the colonial debt of the advanced world to the emerging economies, which would require now today talking about development aid and technology transfer, waiving intellectual property rights in terms of transferring the know-how and investing in the green economy, in particular to the emerging world. So again, if North America, Western Europe wants green transition, they have to put their money where their mouth is, not only in their own country, but also making sure that green investments are funded and mobilized and prioritized in the rest of the world in the global south. Thank you so much for having me here. I got very energized, and apologies if I used up more than my final 5 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Anara, for your very interesting and inspiring speech. Now I'm going to open to our audience to questions. Please say your name and your affiliation if you can. Okay, 3 questions.
Hello, everybody. Listen to me. Thank you very much for your attention. My name is Ricardo Lobato. I am CEO and Chief Analyst of the Brazilian think tank, also an economist. And thank you very much, ma'am, for your presentation. It's a very straight question. On the indexes, when you were showing the developing economies, there was some, like, for instance, Chile, that the GDP was growing a lot, and for instance, South Africa, where you showed that the participation of women in the works market was also growing. My question is, based on this, of the green energy and the government's incentive, have you seen or made any relation with these variables? If there is anything that's straight from it, like this has had an impulse on taking the GDP in Chile, or was there some incentive for women joining the market in South Africa, as same as the other ones? Because these one was the ones that straight line grew the most. So I wanted to know the relation. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Yes, let's collect more questions. Who else? Final.
Thank you, Professor. Professor Anara, usually green jobs need this high-skilled workforce. And so how to deal with how to deal in uneven economies with lower skilled labors, and how to deal with the substitution of labors using high technology like in artificial intelligence and or advanced technologies like in developed economies. Thank you.
Okay. That works, so I'll stay here.
Okay.
Okay, brilliant questions. The methodology that we use here, the black box of vector autoregression, is not particularly handy for addressing why is the multiplier higher in one country or another. I've actually looked at other people who use it for the EU member states. their multipliers are also very diverse. If they take an average, the data is sort of making sense. But the question, why is this so different in Chile versus South Korea, is not something this methodology is capable of answering. We did try to control for some exogenous factors, such as informality of the economy, urbanization, real exchange rate shocks, the oil revenues, sort of some measures that would capture structural features, demographic structure, age, or education composition, and they didn't alter the effects. But again, in a VAR, it's all about within system interaction between variables contemporaneously and through legged effects. Exogenous variables are really at best a control variable to make sure that there's no omitted variable bias in your estimation. They're not really there to explain much, and they didn't explain much. And to my disappointment, for example, they did not improve insignificant effects whenever we had an insignificant effect in India of infrastructure, or in Philippines, lower than 1 multipliers will be positive. Or in South Africa, for example, we have very strong employment effects, in some cases stronger than the GDP stimulus. That sounds too good to be true, as in productivity must be increasing. You can't get more employment than GDP stimulus. We understand this is because of probably urbanization stimulated by public spending in the care, green, or infrastructure. And a lot of jobs are created in the urban economy. A lot of them are informal, and our GDP measure is still only as good as the national accounts is, which is more the formal economy. So we find more employment effect, which is captured probably better by the household labor survey data that does capture informal employment, and we get smaller output effect. So all of these are not explicable in a strong way by this kind of econometric exercise. You really need to look at qualitative evidence. So why is South Korea spending its money probably better than another country in terms of the infrastructure effect, where you get very strong stimulus, for example? Why don't we find a strong stimulus in another country? Where did that money go, right? How to spend it kind of question, we don't get the answers. And I think this invites more country-specific research that combines econometric work like this with qualitative research. Moving on, the skill mismatch, the third question, and then I'm going to come to the gender question, is a big problem. It will be a bigger problem the higher the share of low-skilled labor in your total labor force is. Okay, the good news, not from the research we did, again, it's a black box. It is looking at what the country has done historically and looking at if you invest in the care or green or other infrastructure, what happens in aggregate after allowing for all the transactions complete themselves in terms of both the direct employment effects, indirect input effects, and induced multiplier effects on employment. What do we find for men and women? Okay, historically, I trusted kind of finding that we have positive employment effects, albeit at a lower rate than the output effects. Who is taking these jobs? That analysis isn't doing it, but input-output work that has been done by Ipek Karacan and colleagues for some countries, not for all the 43 countries that they reported to the ILO, but for some countries, they combined input-output analysis with micro-simulations using household survey data. The question they asked is, okay, if I invest in the care economy, I'm creating that much direct and indirect demand for labor in those other subsectors of the economy. These are the jobs that will be on demand. Who will be, what is the probability of you with a PhD degree, highly skilled men getting it compared to a man of color with no formal education getting it, or a woman with a PhD getting it, and so on. So looking at that micro probability estimations, they have reported the effects on men and women only for the care economy, not for the green economy. I think it is yet to be done. And it requires, again, putting the government or the world's research councils money where their mouth is, and hiring more researchers at IPA such that they can do really demanding, labor intensive and data intensive work like that. And then we can answer these questions. I mean, it's in South Africa, I am totally conscious of this fact in showing them aggregate numbers. There are jobs if you shut down coal mines, fossil fuel and transition. COSATU is supporting that. But we have to ask this question: what will happen to the man who is older than 50? No offense to my age group, but I mean, it's a fact. Reskilling, upskilling after the age of 50 is not easy. There is geographical mismatch as well. You may not relocate everyone from where they used to work, shutting down their life sources and telling them here are the new jobs. We need to also think about probably voluntary full compensation retirement schemes for some types of workers. It will be easier to reskill some other types of workers. So we are starting from scratch. We have very little time left, but the future is not lost. So that's all I can say. And there is, yes, more research that needs to be done to really answer your question. And, you know, if Karajan and Kim has done it for some countries, only for the care economy. In terms, I think this sort of replies your question as well. Actually, the green economy isn't that bad in terms of the gender balance. Public physical infrastructure in aggregate in some countries is really not good. And in other countries where the percentage growth in women's employment appears to be higher than men's employment if you invest in infrastructure, gross fixed capital formation. But this is because women's employment is starting from a very low level. It grows at a high rate, but in absolute numbers, again, jobs created for women will be lower than jobs created for men if you're investing in the gross fixed capital formation. So we need to think about how can we make sure that these jobs are not just for a gendered stereotype of men, but also for women. It's about social norms. It's about education policies. It changes. It takes time, but we have to be mindful of that. All the more reason that you have to mix infrastructure and green investment moving forward with today's occupational segregation with care economy stimulus, such that jobs are created for men and women all together. And hence my point about there is not a competition between needs. We can't say ecological transition is urgent. We have to postpone now having more childcare workers. We need to do both. They're both urgent to begin with, apart from the reskilling requirements. If you want to relocate people from fossil fuel to the green economy, you need more education as well. But we need policies to address all the needs of the society. And we have money. We have money in wealth taxation. We have money in the multiplier. We have money in borrowing and in the National Investment Bank and the central bank. So we have to mix all those tools such that we do all of these all at once. And I think I'll end by saying, this is the way, this is the only way, this is our last best hope for peace. A bit learning from your mission anthem. It was formulated a lot more poetically than I could say. Thank you so much. Thanks for having me.
Thank you, Professor Rosamund. Okay, go ahead.
Many thanks, Professor Onaran, for this brilliant lecture. Now the organization of the workshop invites everyone for a small coffee break.
Thank you very much.
I did open the wrong presentation.
No problem at all. It was brilliant as well.
It didn't have any of the technical IRFs. It was actually meant for a non-technical audience, but it was I must have put it in a different folder. I had sent it to you, so I didn't in the short run remember. But
It was great.
it was anyway just enough time. I didn't have time if I had all the in-person questions. Oh, and the introduction was. I'm sorry. Sorry. Yeah.
Oi. Hasta otro.
Exatamente. Obrigado. Pela solidariedade.
Hi, everybody. Let's take your seat and start the section. My name is Beatriz Estulano Vieira, and I am pleasure to open the ordinary section A, Super Multiplier, Liquid and Financial Fragility on the third Structural Macroeconomic Research Group International Workshop. We will have 15 minutes for the presentation, and at the end of the presentation, I will open for questions and answer sections. The first presentation, it is mine, and it is titulated the Super Multiplier Model Considering Export-Led Growth. Well, the article, it is intitulated the Super Multiplier Model Considering Export-Led Growth. And this article is building a dynamic super multiplier with two autonomous demand sources. One is an international government expand, and the other one is external with exports. The central objective is to incorporate the export function into the Stephan super multiplier model. The reason why the motivation in this paper is because in an economy that already has carried out this industrialization process or its capital revolution, long-term growth is determined of effective demand. And the only component that compose the effective demand is export and government expenditure. So in an open economy, the autonomous component is export, as Thoreau shows in his law. It is not showing the equations here. Can you? Well, it is not shows the equation, so I will pass this part a little faster. Okay. Well, sorry for the problems. So because this is a demand-led growth model, the aggregate production will be defined considering the demand, the aggregate demands. So our production is considering the demand and an autonomous consumption and export and the trade international. So the component of aggregate consumption is aggregate consumption and investment. And as the Stephan super multiplier model, the consumptions is demand orientations for wage. And if we considering the Kalekian model, workers will consume everything that they earn, and also according to the Neo-Kalekian model. And the investment function shows that investments will be entirely made by the private sector. So in the autonomous consumption, we'll be considering him because, as we said before, the government expenditure, it's already at least a part autonomous. So we have to consider in this font. We are also considering an export function. What is the difference here? And the autonomous of import is entirely determined by the level of activity of the economic activity. So manipulate the equations, we have the super multiplier that will considering the export in this font, and this is a super multiplier model because we have an accelerator and a multiplier effect here. Here we should have the equations, the very entire in the Jacobian matrix. So let's pass to the import part. We have three propositions in the model, and the first one, the system is unstable because we are considering that both the growth rate of the export and imports are equal to the growth rates of the government expenditure. And in this case, one line and one row to the Jacobian matrix will be null. So as the Hurwitz criteria states that in this case, prove that the proposition 1 is unstable. So the model, as the model deals with export variables and imply in the Herodian instability conditions. The concept refers to the prolonged instability of the economy, that the growth at the rate, it is not sustainable in the long run. So we will not bring this proposition here. The next propositions is the first case that we have a stable case. And this proposition supposes that the sum of the growth rates of the international trades will be bigger than the growth rates of the government expenditure. So in this case, the model will be driven by export. And all the Hurwitz criteria I respect. So by ensuring the level of the growth rate of international trades. Which conclusions we can take by these propositions? That if industrial policy is export orientation and such and increase the growth rate of exports, then higher growth rates can be achieved. And these results are in accord to the results by Araújo and Lima that shows that we have growth led by the balance payments. So the design of effective exchanger would be export propulsions, and these results are confirmed here. So, but as we know, we live in emergent economy. So protections policies should be adopted to avoid the BP problems. This is shown in various works like Ocampo. This is because we have increased the economy elasticity of exports, require productions innovations. So demand will stimulate progress as started by Calder-Verdorn law. The third proposition is the second case that we have Stable's case. And for this, we have to guarantee that the growth rate of government expenditures will be bigger than the growth rate of exports and imports. So in this case, the model will be driven by government expenditures. And all the Hurwitz criteria I respect, only assuring the level of the growth rate of government expenditure. So this shows that the government is an important agent to the model because by increasing its spend, it will increase necessary autonomous demand positively, impact the actual output level. So the political implications, we have to adopt pro-cyclical fiscal policy should be prevalent in developing countries and often in some industrialization countries. It is proposition growth is led by the domestic demand. And this shows that as we saw in the Asian case, is an example
to adopt the fiscal policy, because here we have to adopt fiscal consolidation like public spend because they boost economic growth. Therefore, should be pro-cyclical standards, and they should not be negligence as some model do this, because we make policies prioritize investment in social, such health, educations. And this is not an agent to our economy. After these propositions, we make a numerical simulation of the 3D ODO system approach in the software R. And the values of these cases, they are hypothetical, but they are close to an emerging economy. The first graphical shows the model stability, and as the Serrano, Freitas, and Bering demonstrate, the Schaffen supermultiplier models solves the Herodian stability, and the demand-led equilibrium is stable. So this finds steam from the inclusion of the flexible acceleration in the model, in which investment is derived by the principles of capital adjustment. In this context, we examine a small open economy, and the stability is proved here. And we can see this in this figure. So the main proposition is define what is the macro variables equation about his long-term growth. The next two figures show the ratio of marginal propensity to invest and his capital utilizations. The first figure, it is possible to observe that the model converges the capital utilization to its normal level, and so the model is stable. A great marginal propensity to invest may result in an increase to desired utilizations, and conversely, a decrease in the form may lead to a reductions later. These observations are linked with the behavior of certain economy of scales, in which the rate of return of investment decreases as the level of investments increase. This phenomenon occurs because the tendency of investment to expand in periods of expansions and reduce in the period of crisis. But we have a tendency to the level acting the natural growth and be around 0.8. The next figure, it is possible to observe that the marginal propensity to investable and the ability to invest gravitates cyclical through this normal degree. These results is according with the literature and demonstrate that investment responds discontinuously to the difference between real and normal rate. This is because investment spending capacity have a self-reinforced relationship. And therefore, the Herodian stability are relatively uncommon for this model. After these figures, we have the marginal propensity to investment and export participation rate AD. And the first figure shows the relationship between the marginal propensity to investment and the share of export in aggregate demands, since they are an integrated process. It is worth to mention that there is a feedback looping between the export and investment, and as we have seen in the other figure. So in addition, there's a cyclical behavior at certain level of show exports in aggregate demand, where the marginal propensity to investment may increase or decrease. However, in the long run, it tends to stabilize it. This relationship can be explained by the Keynesian theory of aggregate demand, which supposes that export and investments and are two of the components that compose the aggregate demand. In the other figure, it is worth to mention that aggregate demand has a cyclical behavior, as you can see in the red spot line. As noted by Alain, it's possible to solve the instability of Keynesian macrodynamics. So by combining this stability erosion behavior of companies with the stabilization of the supermultiplier effects. So the share of exports in aggregate demand should be considered in the model, since the variable impacts the investment capacity economy and has a significant impact due to its cyclical nature. To finally the presentations, I bring the major conclusions of the workers. So this model retains a certain core results of the supermultiplier model. Moreover, if exports are considered in the model, they have a positive impact in the growth rate of the productions. And it can be concluded that increased exports are crucial for the growth, but also once achievable, government expense must also to increase export to external space again. Thus, countries should propose policies on the supply and the demand sides. Therefore, growth is led by the components of supplies and demands. And these conclusions are also in line in what Professor Onara brings to us, that we cannot ignore the supply sides in the model, and now we have to have another component and considering this. Now I bring some references that I brought, and I like to thank the opportunity to present in this section. Now I invited Clayton to present his paper, Bank Liquidity Behavior in Times of Crisis in Brazil.
Hi, everyone. My name is Clayton Feio. I'm a professor of Federal Institute of Brasilia. On behalf of my co-workers, co-authors, I would like to thank you all for coming and for the third international workshops Structuralist Development Macroeconomic Research Group to give me this opportunity to present my paper, Banking Liquidity Behavior in Times of Crisis in Brazil, in this prestigious event. So, motivation, justification, method, data, and analysis of the results. Final thoughts. Over the past 10 years, the Brazilian economy has struggled with a series of crises in both political and economic matters. For us, one of the central points of this crisis is the political instability that led our country to extreme right agenda, which influenced especially the monetary side of economy. In this vein, we propose a study to comprehend the banking liquidity fragility and its effects on economic growth in the income distribution in a post-Keynesian view. The financial crisis in Brazil and in the world are directly linked to political instability. Thus, our paper intends to evaluate such a link, especially dealing with the evolution of banking liquidity between 2011 and 2021. Our timeline will review the most recent crisis, starting with Dilma's dilemma, her ideological disagreements with the central bank presidents in the Minister of the Economy, Alexandre Tombini and Joaquim Levy in that time. Evolving to her impeachment demonstrated the influence of the new liberal agenda proposed by President Temer, which results in the ascendance of Bolsonaro. At last mentioned, President imposed, with his Minister of Economics, Paulo Guedes, a much stronger new liberal agenda. Therefore, his plan was faced with the coronavirus pandemic crisis, with the financial stability. So, the Paula 2006 affirms that the theory of liquidity preference demonstrates that are different degrees of liquidity abdicated by agents which are compensated by higher returns. Banks are firms that carry out financial intermediation, such as transferring resources from agents with surplus to agents with deficits, promoting and influencing means of payment, financing, and interfering with the level of economic activity. So this article presents the hypothesis: banks in times of crisis in Brazil have greater preference for liquidity. Method and data. In order to verify the behavior of the spread of private banking firms in relation to interest on credit operations and the totality of loans, and how these last two variables affect the first, considering the economic context that Brazil has faced in relation to the preference for liquidity since March 2011 and the ended in December 2021. The structural brick test will be applied throughout this period using the show method. We used a linear regression of the data, banks, spreads versus interest on credit operations, and the total loans was performed for each period of the structural brick, as well as the analysis of the results of descriptive statistics, that is, before the brick and after of the brick, and the comparison of data in order to understand the different economic scenarios that culminated the brick points, the years of the brick points. So, if it's worth mentioning that with regards to the econometric analysis, the bank spread is the dependent variable, and the interest on the credit operations and the total loans are the independent variables. So, please. Here we see the figure 1 behavior of the risk premium measured by the bank spread 2011 to 2021. The graphical results of the analysis periods can be seen in graphical 1, in which it's possible to perceive a downward trend of less than 14 percentage points for the spread in the year 2012 until mid-2014. The spreading curve had recovery peaks with the tendency in increasing 2015 and 2016, reaching a maximum growth point in January 2017, with rates close to 24 percentage points. When analyzing the evolution of the bank spread in considering the behavior of the interest of credit operations and the totality of the loans, the structural bricks were carried out by the show method, so that it was possible to perceive that there were bricks in 4 points. May 2013, March 2016, April 2018, and March 2020. Behavior, this figure shows us behavior of the interest rates on credit operations. The graphical results of the analyzing periods can be seen in graphical 2, in which it is possible to perceive a downward trend of around 20 percentage points for the interest rate in 2013, and an upward recovery in the years 2014, 2015, 2016, and reaching a peak increase of 32.54 percentage points in January 2017 of the V-shaped curve. Interesting, the graphical 1 and the graphical 2 is very similar, the curve. Figure 3, behavior of total loans. The loan supply curve has a rising shape with volatility and irregular periods of rising and fall. The loan recorded in March 2011 was more than 192 million reals. So in December 2013, it reached the peak of more than 262 million reals. That is, loans had an increase of at least 36 percentage points, despite the fluctuation from January 2014 to December 2017. The average value of loans was just over 230 million reals, reaching the value of 273 million reals lent at the end of that period. Final thoughts. The theory of Keynes and the post-Keynesians that banking firms have a preference for liquidity is confirmed in the scenario of uncertainty, when banks without loans they were available for investment spending would have a positive impact that would raise the level of employment with the multiplier effects of employment and income in the economy, reducing the cost of maintaining employed workers. In other words, as Keynes points out, it is necessary to rescue the basic principles of the anti-cyclical fiscal policy, establish investment spending taxations, and state loans as important instruments against involuntary unemployment, which is recurrent in times of economic crisis in Brazil. Again, in behalf of my co-authors, I would like to thank you all. And now we are opening to Q1 section.
Let me take this opportunity to point out some thoughts here. Professor Oreiro, in the beginning of the section, he mentioned that the interest rate, the increasing interest rate in Brazil is only providing more income for bankings and the financial system. So our paper is in light to this point because we have an increasing interest rate since the beginning of the middle of the last year, and high expressive right agenda, neoliberal agenda in Brazil since President Michel Temer. So it's possible to know and to observe with our results that the neoliberal agenda only provides more income to the financial system and it struggle all the others in the society. This is our paper. I am the third co-author at this paper, Professor Clayton.
Yes.
And thank you very much for our audience and for you all stay here to listen us. It's a pleasure to be here in this prestigious conference or workshop. So I think that the Q&A will be presented after all the presentations. So thank you very much. Thank you, Sha. If I have to close the window, thank you.
Actually, the last presentation will not be made. So if you have any questions, please, now we are open to the questions and answer sections. Vem pra cá. So anyone have questions?
I'm back.
If no one have questions, I will.
Oh, no. She's anxious. Really anxious.
Well, let me congratulate you all for your very interesting presentations. I have one question for each of the presenters. The first one for you. What do you think about the exogenous impact of the super multiplier? I was talking to Professor Onaran during your speech that I spent a lot of time complaining about our neoclassical colleagues with their exogenous growth models, especially the solo type one. And sometimes I feel a little bit uncomfortable with the idea that the source of demand is exogenous, like in the super multiplier demand-led growth model. So I would like to listen from you about your thoughts about the relationship between exogenous growth, neoclassical growth models and our exogenous post-Keynesian growth models. That's it.
We have more questions?
One for them, can I?
Sure.
Okay. Congratulations as well. And I was wondering, why did you choose the shock test? Why didn't you use, for example, Kuzum test or Lista-Seed test to identify a structural break? What was the point?
Professor, and I have a question.
Thank you very much. Both really fascinating work, and I like it when someone tries to quantify the policy interventions or policy shocks, let's say, coming from presidential elections or other policy interventions. My question is also on the super multiplier. You had very interesting phase diagrams about capacity utilization versus investment propensity. Did you also look at the government spending versus private investment propensity? Maybe to show if there are further effects from government spending on private investment coming beyond demand effect, whether the propensity is changing because government spending is providing useful infrastructure. So it would be nice a little bit to think about, well, again, the endogeneity between demand and supply, fiscal policy, and public and private investment. Yeah, going beyond to really dig more into policy relevance of the kind of very interesting and quite high-tech work you're doing.
Sorry, thank you very much for your presentation. My question is kind of on the super multiplier paper. I also have one question for you, but I'll go to that. I think it's related to what Özlem was asking. So I saw the stability in your model is the dynamic stabilized when you have the export demand, but stabilized when the government expenditure actually is introduced. So what is the intuition there? What exactly is happening when you introduce government expenditure? How does the model stabilize? That's my question on the model per se. In terms of your paper, I would like to know what kind of did you have, like Indian case, there's a lot of non-performing assets in the banks or sitting on the balance sheets. Did you have any of such issues that you face right now in the case of very high interest rates, and the loans are also quite volatile in terms of tracking the interest rate? So I wanted to know what is the share of non-performing assets that are sitting in the private banks' balance sheets?
And so we will answer the questions. First, your question. I have some criticals about the super multiplier model because I am not so convinced about the autonomous component. So if I have to consider one, I think that exports should be the one choose, because I don't know, I think in the emerging economy, we have to consider in this because we have since the beginnings of the time export-led growth. So if I have to consider one, this should be my guess. Now, if I have to talk about the propensity to invest capacity, here, as we saw in 2016, the marginal propensity to invest is made most part of the private sector. So we have to consider in the fiscal policy that make incentive the investments. So we have to consider that fiscal policy should be made to stimulate the investments made principal by the private sectors. But this should be a pro-cyclical, because when we have a fine scenario, the investment will be made more by the private sector. This is in line with what we see, because in 2015, we saw the scenario, a bad scenario, and the investments was shut down. So we have the crowd to avoid the crowd out. And sorry, I forgot your question.
O que induz a estabilidade?
Tá. what conduces the stability is the flexible accelerator, because we have the accelerator that when we have the output capacity lower than the natural growth, the people will not invest. So when the utilization capacity is bigger, we have the investments made, and the stability will, when we considering the people will be made investables in the external sections. They will look for the investments in the external sections, because these guarantee a more profitable investments. So the stability is made by the investment made in the external section.
I already BS paper, and it's very interesting. It's truly interesting. She had a remarkable thoughts about export-led growth and the presence of the government spending there. So her paper usually talk about how government spending or export-led growth models could help the economy to converge to its normal capacity utilization. But it cannot be both at the same time. We cannot have both at the same time in her paper. It is really interesting because the government spending usually helps the demand to increase the demand in all kinds of visions. Keynes already defended that. Scott in 2016 presented a paper at Metroeconomica, published a paper at the Metroeconomica, talking about how to deal with autonomous components. He said that REIT cannot guarantee autonomous components. Any REIT cannot guarantee autonomous components because they usually only consume luxury. So what alternative we have to induce the economy to its capacity utilization? He also agreed that export is usually autonomous to the domestic income, but it's not autonomous to the foreign income. But in the case of a domestic economy, for us, only interested that if the autonomous component is free for the domestic income. So in this case, we can have an autonomous component led by the exports. On the other hand, the government spending is usually deals with the guarantee of benefits to the society and also increase income. So they also can be autonomous for the income because the income is only in transfer. We only have transfer from income from rich to poor people, or transfer income from capitalists to workers, and so on. In this case, the autonomicity is guaranteed. So if we choose to believe that government spending and export-led growth and the exports are autonomous, in this case, we can ensure that the model will converge the normal capacity utilization, will converge the capacity utilization to its normal level, which is linked to what Professor Onaran talked about recently, that we usually live in a society that we have excess capacity utilization. In this vein, her paper can be in line with the Brazilian economy we already wrote a paper together about the Latin America and Brazil. And we saw that usually using econometric analysis, we have problems with private investments. And the only investment that can guarantee sustainability in a long run in Brazil is the public investment. So I think that her paper is very interesting. I really recommend all of you to read. It's an important paper in my point of view, of course.
Now, Clayton, if you.
So, in other paper, I test in the brick test method of brick test, Cousin by Perron, and show test. The results are similar. So I testing to the public debt in Brazil to found the structural bricks too. So you use it in this paper, show test, because the behavior, the results are very similar.
I'm usually the technical support of the papers here. So
My coworker.
yeah. Please. I couldn't write what was your question about the share to non-performing assets. Could you repeat, please? What? Okay. Our single problem here is not we are not concerning how the economy is performing the distribution of income or the growth instantaneously. We are concerned about how this interest rate, this higher interest rate, or how the political implications usually affect the loans or the spread. So I really did not understand your question, but the performing here is only to understand how these breaks affected the economy, how these breaks affected the increasing amount of income to banks and struggling the labor income. I don't know if I answer your question. Okay.
Landed property agricultural landlords who get these loans, or industrialists, small firms, startups, and so on. That when the time of elections, this becomes a huge thing of non-performing assets become a huge thing, and the governments, they just say, okay, we'll roll this off. Right? Yeah. So the non-performing assets in an economy, due to high interest rates and so on, that reflects certain fragility in the economy. Mm-hmm. It also reflects certain power, because the rolling off during the election, just before the elections. So in any political democracy, there is a link between, how much money that's been lent in the formal banking system and the, elections, who is coming to the power and so on. It is with that thing that I asked whether is it true, or is it same in the case of Brazil, that you give loans to different sectors like agriculture. I mean, if agriculture is a lot of loans in agriculture, what is the distribution of these loans, and who are these people who are getting these loans and so on? That's where I was.
Okay, so in Brazil, we have a huge politics to incentive credit here. And the loans will be treated like credits. Our problem here is that usually the economy tends to provide more efficient in financial system here in Brazil. We have a really efficient financial system and a really we have an outstanding division of income. We have the 1% the richest 1% of the richest here in Brazil have like 44% of the total capital in Brazil, and the other 66% is divided between the 99% of the people. So ours, in this case, the only agent being benefited by this kind of politics is the financial system. They are earning like billions and billions and billions of dollars that could be divided between education, health, and the other sectors. And the only sector to be benefited is the finance. But they ensure that the politicians will be in line. We will have a few politicians that will live in this kind of situation. I don't know if I answer your question, but our situation here in Brazil is really hard. It's really severe here because we have a few politicians looking at to the society and a lot of politicians only looking at for the financial system.
We have more questions. So I think we can finish the section. It was a pleasure to present here in this prestigious conference. So that's it, folks. Now let's have some lunch.
Thank you.
Thank you all.